And in this session, we are focusing on concepts in thinking. And as a reminder, concepts is one of the elements of reasoning. And we can discuss the relationship between concepts and the other elements. So it's one of the elements of reasoning. And the others are purpose, question, information, interpretation or inference, assumptions, implications, and point of view. So we can burrow into the concept of concepts in multiple ways, but let's begin, Gerald, if we could, with just a brief explanation, if you would, on what a concept is in your view, how you think of concept.
Yeah. So I'm glad to do this because in my judgment, concept is maybe of the 8 elements, the one we focus on least. I don't mean we at the Foundation for Critical Thinking, but when we, as regular people, are thinking about something. Another one that we don't think about that much is assumptions, but concepts kind of tends to lie under our radar. So the 8 elements are, each of them map out a different aspect of thinking or of thinking well. And but in English, often we use those 8 elements, the terms for those 8 elements in overlapping ways. So point of view and assumption and conclusion are often used interchangeably. My point of view in this matter is, and then I say something political, whereas that's really probably a conclusion or an assumption. Whereas point of view is a way of looking at things. So you and I, for instance, might have this, we might have identical assumptions about what's going on, and we might have identical conclusions about what's going on, and yet you're going to be seeing it from Linda Elder's point of view, and I'm going to be seeing it from Gerald Nosich's point of view. So I use that as an illustration because that's especially true with concepts. We use the word concepts for all kinds of things, and there's a way in which there's nothing especially wrong with it, but one of the things it does is it prevents us from focusing in on one of the prime meanings of concepts. So for me, a concept, an essential idea about a concept is that it's a category. It's a kind of thing. Now that's not really very helpful, but another way of saying it is that if you're looking for a concept, you're wondering about the meanings of key terms. Now, both Richard and I have antipathy to the concept of meaning because we both come from a philosophy background. But if I make it plural, meanings of key terms, it means it's to ask, so what do you mean by that? So that seems to me a good question that leads you essentially into concepts most of the time. So we're talking about whether democracy is being undermined in the United States today, or we're talking about whether Putin is a dictator, or let me switch fields. We are talking about the effects of gravity on something, or we're talking about the Big Bang and how things come from that, or we're talking about cognitive dissonance in the social sciences. And so we talk about cognitive science, or we talk about the Big Bang, or we talk about democracy and whether this is leading to democratic or undemocratic processes. But often we don't stop and ask ourselves, well, what do we mean by democracy? That is, what's your concept of democracy? What's your concept? What do you mean by gravity? That turns out to be a particularly difficult one. And actually, all those years of using the concept of gravity, nobody knew what it was. Newton famously said, I don't know. I'm not going to make any hypothesis about what in the world gravity is. So, so what's a concept? A concept is you take the key terms that you're using when you're describing something or when you're coming to a decision, and you ask yourself, what do I mean by that? So if I take the 8 elements, purpose, question and issue, assumptions, each one of those is a concept, right? And so I can ask, so what do you mean by purpose? Or what do you mean by an assumption? Or what do you mean by an inference? Or or another way of saying that is not just what do you mean, but what is an inference? What is a conclusion? What is an interpretation? And when you're asking that kind of question, you're getting at something like a description of what it means. Another way of saying it is you're looking sometimes for a definition, but for me, definition is often too narrow because people then mean it's got to be spelled out completely, and that would be nice, but for many concepts, you can't quite spell them out completely. You can give, but you can give them a much clearer, more precise idea of what a democracy is. And of course, for any of these, there can be multiple points of view on what the concept means. I remember some years ago, people were talking about vitamin K. That is, biologists and nutritionists were talking about vitamin K. And the topic came up, well, what's a vitamin? And in particular, what is vitamin K? And that became a topic in journals for several years. Notice, that's a question about concepts. But you could very well go on talking about vitamins all the time without ever asking yourself, wait a minute, let me step back from that question and ask, what do I mean by a vitamin? What is a vitamin? So it's a part of critical thinking that we often overlook a great deal. So that to me is the core concept of a concept. And I want to distinguish it from something else. It's contrasting. So a concept is the meaning of a key term, say, or the meanings of a key term. And it's not, so I'm now going to say something kind of linguistic, but it's not really about linguistics. If I put a concept in a sentence, like democracy is preferable to dictatorship, right? I'm saying something definite and limited. Whereas if I ask myself, what's the concept of democracy? I can apply that all over the place, not just in relation to dictatorships or this government or that government or when it occurred or when it started in ancient Greece and how it flourished in Florence. So one of the things about concept, as I'm using this term, is that it's extremely flexible. So it enlightens all over the time. A sentence is limited. So I can say, well, I'll just take one of the elements. Identify your purpose. Notice that's a sentence, right? Mm-hmm. And what it leads you to do is one particular thing, identify your purpose. Whereas the concept of purpose, the concept by itself, without saying identify the concept of purpose goes all over the place. Identify your purpose, evaluate your purpose, assess it, compare it to my purpose. Work out how your purposes and my purposes can be reconciled to one another. So the fact that you make it a concept, the meaning of a key term, means it's extremely flexible. Whereas if I embed it in a sentence, it becomes much more limited. Anyhow, that's my take on concepts. First, what they are, and second of all, why they are so incredibly useful.